data. In fact, they originally helped us with a survey about 5 years ago. Bonnie Whalen-Smith is the principal of B. Whalen-Smith Consulting. Their specialty is in data, outcomes evaluation, program evaluation. The way I learned about Bonnie, she actually conducted the Youth Service Voices Count survey for us. And I was like, we really need to hire an evaluation person. I was looking at the website. Ta-da! That's also an expertise that they have. So we've had a lot of conversations over the last few months, along with Alyssa Gilbert, who helps out at the organization, particularly looking at data, pulling reports, and really getting to know the communities and the partners that they work with. And then Kirsten Carew is brand new to their organization, so she came to see kind of how one of these presentations goes. So we're thrilled to have you all here. Bonnie.
Thank you. Thanks so much for everyone coming today. It's really nice to be in Summers. I have some background with Summers. Many years ago, I worked as the director of an organization called Erase, which at that time oversaw the Local Prevention Council grant. So I have some connection to Summers. It's nice to be back here after a really long time. Matthew did a great job saying who we are and a good high level about what we do. All three of us have a strong background in public health and data-driven planning. Kirsten, joining our team officially actually next week, has a background as an epidemiologist from a local health district in Connecticut. And Alyssa and I met at Yukon Health doing some work there around substance use and other behavioral health issues around local and state level data. So we're bringing all our skills together to both share with you the data about Summers Youth, but also use your expertise about Summers to help us make some decisions today to guide sort of the direction or enhancements around the Drug-Free Communities grant that Summers has, which is a prevention grant. And Taylor, did you want to say anything about Drug-Free Communities? I think some folks might be familiar.
Yeah, so the reason why I was hired in January is because you all received the grant last year. So I think the most important part to this is that right now I'm working on 6 products for National Coalition Academy, and hopefully going through this data a little bit more will help get some of your ideas and input throughout the town of how youth are using these substances, where they're using these substances, and then I pieced it all together. So I've already started that. I am not a resident of Summers. I didn't grow up here, so I don't want to speak on behalf of the youth, and then maybe Lainey can give some input. She's very thankfully here because she is a youth. So that's all I have to say right now. But
that's
I just want everyone to kind of keep open ears, and if you have anything to say to me, email me, call me, whatever. Talk to me after this.
Perfect. I consider this kind of a 2-for-1 special today. We're both looking at data and using the data in one session. So it's going to be a little bit intensive, but we'll keep it moving. We'll talk fast and stop us if you have questions. I'm going to start by presenting the data in a moment, but I'd love if you all could just introduce yourselves. Are you a resident, maybe a staff person from the community, so we have a context of who's here and we can kind of plug into your skills and expertise. Matthew, I think they know who you are. Maybe, Bob, would you mind starting?
Yeah, I'm selectman in town. I live in town, obviously.
Great.
Tim Casey, first selectman, born and raised in Summers.
Greg Jones, I'm the school resource officer here in town.
I'm Lainey, I'm part of the Youth Leadership Council.
Gerard Joyle, also a police officer here in town and the other school resource officer, and a resident in town 21 years.
Colleen Meyer, I am a resident in town, but I'm here on behalf of the school district. We have administration.
Okay.
Scott Spence, pastor across the street at Summers Congregational United Church of Christ.
Cassie Mashak, I represent the business, small business end of town.
Gail Tischler, resident of Summers and former guidance counselor in Stafford Springs.
Eden Matthews, I'm the youth service social worker.
Christina Hodo, social services coordinator.
Kim Litting, police administrator. For the past 10 years, I do not reside in Summers.
Justin Franks, resident trooper.
Dorothy Ruggiero, I'm here in the elementary school and middle.
And then Taylor Setzler, I'm the prevention coordinator.
Great. We met Kirsten.
I'm Brian Wissinger. I'm the chief financial officer.
Thanks so much. This is a really nice, we use the term sectors officially in our work, wonderful representation of the community and sectors. Alyssa, if we'll just jump to the agenda.
Sure.
I think we touched upon what we're doing already, but we're going to look at data. We're going to use your expertise to make decisions about what substances you feel are of most concern for youth in Summers and maybe why that is the case here is sort of the high level way. And then we will work with Taylor based on whatever happens today, whatever we discuss, help her enhance the work she's already begun so that it matches up this current survey data as well as your perspectives. Alyssa puts together, let's just be clear, Alyssa does the reporting. Alyssa made the PowerPoint, so Matthew's introductory was lovely and almost accurate, but she put together just a quick check-in on where Summers stands using census data from 2020 and 2021, American Community Survey, and some other sources to just give a snapshot of where we are today in terms of the population of Summers. What I noticed when I looked at the data is that Summers is skewing a little bit older than the state. 22% of the population is age 19 and younger, but our Summers in general is skewing older. It's a fairly homogeneous community with 85% of the population identifying as white, and then the ethnicities or the 6% ethnicity, Hispanic, Latino, and in terms of race, other race and Black or Hispanic are about 5.6%. The median household income is much higher here in Summers than the state of Connecticut, $107,000 versus about $84,000, and the poverty rate is much less at 2.1%. I always like to identify, though, that just because we see a higher socioeconomic status does not mean that there are not substance use or other behavioral health problems. We know that. This is a universal issue for all populations, with different risk factors at times based on these situations. So we'll move into the youth survey data now, because we don't have a ton of other data in Summers related to behavioral health, but we have really good youth data. From January 2023, youth in grades 7 through 12 here in Summers participated in the survey our company provides. Here in Connecticut, of course, the Summers, and I think we're at about 21 other communities in the last couple of years. So the survey covers a number of topics: gaming, gambling, bullying, social media use, mental health, and certainly substance use. And we'll tap into some of that, but not all of it will be seen today. There is a very large report available. Students were informed it was completely anonymous, and it is indeed completely anonymous. My own children take the survey. I can't tell what they say. There was instructions indicating this to them as well. So I just always like to highlight that we did do some subgroup analysis by students identified biological sex. So within our full report, there's information about who females or males, what's statistically significantly different in some indicators. We're not going to dive too deep into that at all today, but I'd like to point it out because it's interesting information. And in comparison data, Alyssa does a great job doing analysis on the data around district reference groups. She has it roll off the tongue better than I, so I'll have her explain what that means.
Sure. So because we have a nice array of communities that our survey is implemented in, we actually have the ability to look at some comparison data, because the number one question that comes up when we talk about these data with people is, well, does this look about right to you? Is this what you expected? And so we can look at 5 other communities in the same district reference group as Summers to say, yeah, this is how you compare to the group. So the district reference groups, for those who aren't familiar, are compiled by the State Department of Education. They're grouped A through I believe, for all 130 or so school districts in the state. And that is determined based on socioeconomic status. There's 3 indicators there that determine that. Need, which includes things like percent of children eligible for free or reduced lunch, speaking another language at home, and then enrollment size. So those 7 indicators together make these different groupings. So as we said, Summers falls in District Group C, and we have 5 other communities to make up a kind of sample of what DRGC is showing. And so you'll see that, and we'll point it out when we go through it, on some of the emotional health indicators and substance use indicators, just so you can kind of see where we're falling relative to other peers that are somewhat similar.
What are the other 5 communities?
We can't say, because we promise communities anonymity. But if you look at District Reference C, our District Reference Group C on the State Department of Ed website, you'll see the long list. So can you list an example that may not be in the data set of what's in C? Putting you on the spot.
I don't think so.
I know Wethersfield is D, because I live in Wethersfield.
So I would say that they're fairly small rural communities in like the northwest pocket or northeast pocket in general.
I think Andover, Huber, and Monroe is one that stands out to me as one. And I'm sorry that I can't say which specifically. Okay, moving to, we had an excellent response rate here, about 90%. So these data are very strong representing the community. We know that like some kids missed it, and if some kids are really in a difficult place around substance use, I say this universally, they may not have participated in the survey. They might not have been in school that day, but we feel that survey data is consistently inconsistent, so that it's not perfect, but it's a great snapshot on what's happening with youth, especially when we see such a strong response rate. We talk about race, ethnicity in the community based on census data. This data represents the youth who participate in the survey, where they stand in terms of race, ethnicity. The categories are not mutually exclusive. They can select all that apply. But about 82% of youth identified as white, slightly less than the census data that we saw. And slightly more identifying as Hispanic or Latino than we saw in the census data, I believe. And less so identifying as Black or African American. Looking at gender identity, youth had an opportunity to identify where they stood in terms of gender, not biological sex. That's a different question. So some identify mostly as male or female, and I did the percentage for you all. In terms of gender, 3% total identifying as transgender, non-binary, or unsure right now. Moving down to sexual identity, about 16% identified as gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, something else, or unsure. That's fairly consistent with the communities that were collecting this data. Not all communities collect that data. Time alone on weekdays without supervision. So generally, most youth spend 1 to 2 hours alone, and as you might expect, youth who are older spend more time alone than those in the middle school. We collect these data just because in some cases we like to look at this to see if this is related to substance use or not. This is about gaming, assets and consequences. We know that there are benefits and possibly downsides to youth participating in gaming. Looking overall for grades 7 through 12, which is that lighter blue color, the most common thing we see is that youth feel more connected with others as a result of their gaming activities. After that, we see, particularly in the middle school, that darker blue, have most, or I should say, 38% had purchased loot boxes or skins, so in-game purchases. Just information to know. And then some felt that this earned credibility with their peers for how they play. So those are sort of the top 3 things that stand out, but many are very close together. Oh, yeah.
This basically video games?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm removed.
That's okay. We call it gaming, but it's video games or in-app games.
Thank you.
Sure. We'll look at social media now, and again, feeling more connected with others, particularly at the high school level, with about 62% reporting feeling more connected as a result of social media. On the downside, about 43% of students saw or heard something online that their parents or guardians would think was inappropriate at the high school level, and about 40% reported having a hard time stopping. And that's a newer question for us, having a hard time stopping, so we're kind of monitoring that across all the communities we work with. Not surprising to me, to be honest. I think that's a good summary of what we have here. Next, we'll look at bullying. So the good news is almost 40% of students have reported never having been bullied. So that's great. Happy to hear it. I'm always concerned about those youth who said that almost every day out of the last 30, they have experienced bullying. So that's 2.2% or 10 youth. And when I put it all together, it looked like about 13% of students had been bullied in some way in the past month. It's a good segue to emotional health, which is where Alyssa's going to jump in.
Okay, I'm trying to decide if I want to sit or stand. I think I want to stand.
I'll click.
Okay, thank you. So the first question in the emotional health section relates to anxiety. So we asked, how often have you felt nervous or scared or like something bad was going to happen in the past year? And so this is not necessarily like a diagnosable level of anxiety, but like a frequency. And we see that about 30% of youth overall reported feeling anxious almost always or always within the past year. This is, my head is nodding right now. This is a good area where we want to look at the comparison here. So we're seeing in, relative to our other sample of DRGC, 17% saying almost always, 10% saying always, pretty similar overall relative to summer, so about similar to the peers. When we're looking at what our sources of anxiety are, this is a little tricky. The middle school bar is on the left, and then the high school bar is on the right, and that repeats for each domain. The ones that stand out for high school, academics, post-high school planning or college, and schedule. For middle school, similarly academics, then the next one for middle schoolers is peers, and then third being post-high school planning, which kind of surprised me. I feel like when I was in middle school, maybe I wasn't thinking about post-high school planning, but that was a while ago. For all grades, lowest was financial security and social media. So we always say this is kind of our loaded slide with some of the heavier information. Overall, about 18% of youth surveyed reported thoughts of self-harm, and about 11% reported actually harming themselves. This is all within the past year. About 4% describing physical abuse from an intimate partner, boyfriend or girlfriend or otherwise. And about 20% saying they were sad or hopeless 2 or more weeks in a row in the past year, kind of getting at somewhat of a depression-type indicator. And then 9.7% overall reported having considered suicide in the past year. Again, looking at the comparison data here, these rates in general are a little bit lower than what we're seeing in the other communities in DRGC, right? So self-harm is a little bit higher overall in DRGC, same thing with depression, same thing with suicide. I also wanted to note the state Department of Public Health does the Connecticut School Health Survey, and they survey a random sample of maybe it's not random, maybe it's strategic, but 15 or 20 schools, and they survey specifically the high schoolers, and their rates were a lot higher overall. So, of course, that's reflecting all sorts of DRG communities, but they had about 36% reporting sad or hopelessness, 14.1% having considered suicide, and 18% having harmed themselves in the past year. And again, that's high school specific. So overall, while these numbers are concerning and it's very important that we think about what we can do for the youth, relative to peers, they're a little bit lower. Looking at students or youth comfort-seeking help, particularly from family or schools, always we see this across the board, parents and guardians number one. 64% of youth reported that they feel comfortable seeking help from their parents or guardians. Only 55% reporting their friends, a little higher in the high school than in the middle school. 20% saying they feel comfortable seeking help from school staff. We see that very commonly. That's about where I expect that number to be. 16% from a coach, and 38% reporting that they have another trusted adult in their lives that they feel comfortable seeking help from. Getting into substance use, so first we're going to look at the lifetime use of core substances and gambling. This means have you ever used in your lifetime even once? So if these numbers are higher, don't forget that this could be someone who used once and did not use again. So we're seeing in general, of course, higher rates in the high school. What stands out to me is alcohol is number one, 28% reporting ever using alcohol in their lifetime. About 20% reporting binge drinking, drinking 4 or more drinks in one setting. Marijuana stands out as well, 18.5% at the high school level, but 13% overall. Vaping also standing out as third, 17.6% at the high school level, 13% overall from the middle school or high school. The prescription drug numbers are very low, over-the-counter are very low. That's pretty common in how we expect it. And then gambling, we're keeping an eye on. Obviously, it's a little bit different than substance use, but we like to look at it because of like the reward mechanisms and addiction components that are kind of similar to substance use. Looking at the DRG, note that that's, again, grades 6 through 12 for the comparison data, so we want to look at 7 through 12, but know that we have some 6th graders in our sample that are kind of pulling those numbers lower. The use rates are a little bit higher, especially around alcohol. That stands out to me. Marijuana, that stands out to me. The substances of very high concern, like prescription drugs, those are very similar, not very different. Let's look at the past month use to get a little closer look. So, as you know, the survey was done, I believe, in January. So at that time, we said, in the past 30 days, how often, or have you used these substances? And so this is more of like a current use indicator. Again, the pattern holds where alcohol is the most frequent. Overall, 9.6% of students surveyed reported using alcohol in the past month, higher at the high school level, 14%, 4.7%, or 6.8% binge drinking overall, 11% of those high schoolers reporting that. Marijuana stands out again as the second most frequently used substance. That's 6.6% overall, 9.4% at the high school level. And then vaping, of course, actually it's pretty close, 7.3% overall, but then 9.4% at that high school level again. And similarly, again, all these numbers have gone down a little bit from the lifetime use because this is the more current use. Less people are currently using at the time of the survey. The next thing we'll talk about is marijuana use, specifically because of the link to vaping. Vaping is a huge problem in Connecticut and in high schools across the country. What I wanted you to know is of those who have used marijuana, so not of everybody, only those who have used marijuana in the past year, how did they use it? And about half reported vaping it. So that's why we're always concerned about what is in the vapes. Do kids always know what's in the vapes, etc. So I'm going to pause on this one because this is a tricky slide. This is the age of first use in years, so we say like onset. But what I want you to know is, if you recall, over-the-counter use and prescription drug use is very low. So while these are kind of very young, this is not most kids. Most kids are not using these substances and have not used these substances. So they're kind of impacted by how many have used. That's why I put the count on the bottom, right? So while kids maybe use over-the-counter drugs for the purposes of getting high at a young age, only 11 kids reported ever having doing so. When we look at more of these more commonly used substances, alcohol, marijuana, etc., you see that it really is at that 13 and older age group. So now we're going to look at risk factors, and these are some things that we're going to be really keying into later as far as prioritizing what we think we can kind of shift and change the perspective of use on. So we always want these risk factors to be nice and high. So this is your perception of risk. We want youth to be reporting that they perceive using substances to be moderate or greatly risky. So the higher the better, the less likely they will use. So the highest perception of risk always is prescription drugs, which is great. So 86% overall reported that they believe it is moderate or greatly risky for them to use prescription drugs. The next most frequent one is cigarettes, about 80% reporting that. They believe that that's risky. And then third is vaping, which is surprising. We don't always see that. Sometimes the perception of risk around vaping is low, so perhaps messaging is really reaching communities, and that's fantastic. What stands out to me here is marijuana. Only less than half of youth in the high school level are reporting that they believe marijuana is risky, 49%. Overall, with the middle school factored in, it's about 56%, still fairly low, especially relative to these other substances. Alcohol is also low-ish, about 70% overall reporting moderate or great risk from using alcohol. So now we'll look at perception of ease of access. So this is another one we want to be nice and high. How easy is it for youth to get substances? The harder it is, the less likely they're going to use it. If it's very easy, it gets into their hands more easily and they can use and share. So what stands out to me here, alcohol. In high school, most people are saying it's easy. It's less than half are reporting that it's very hard or sort of hard. In fact, they're reporting it's easy or very easy. What also jumps out here is tobacco is pretty hard, which is good. Marijuana, fairly hard. prescription drugs, the most difficult to get, so great. Alcohol, overall 56% reporting that it's very hard. 66 or so reporting vaping is hard, whether it's nicotine or other flavored liquids. We can continue. Looking at parental disapproval, if youth believe that their parents think that it is wrong, they're less likely to use. So these are nice and high. We want them to be high. That is good news overall. Prescription drugs, again, continue to be perceived as the most wrong. They believe that their parents would feel it's very wrong for them to use. So 98% are saying, my parents are not okay with this. Followed by smoking cigarettes. That's cigarettes, not smoking other things, just cigarettes. And then third, as far as highest level of parental disapproval, is vaping nicotine. The ones that are a little bit lower, again, alcohol and marijuana, but they're still in the 90s, so these are fairly high overall. That's great.
If only everything could be like prescription drugs.
Right. Looking at peer disapproval, these are lower, and this is what we expect to see. Youth believe that their peers feel it is mostly wrong for them to use substance use. The highest level of that we see, again, for prescription drugs, 87% saying that their peers would feel it is moderate or greatly wrong for them to use, followed by, again, smoking cigarettes. Third, marijuana. This one is interesting a little bit because the pattern changes here. The easiest or lowest level of peer disapproval for this is vaping nicotine, and you can especially see that in the high school level, where just over half are reporting that their friends would feel it's wrong for them to vape. Next, we're looking at where youth are getting substances. So this is among those who have used, and we ask where they're most likely to be acquiring these substances, and they can check multiple. If you hone in on the gray bar, that is friends or peers. So that kind of stands out across the board for regardless of substances. Mostly they're getting it from friends or peers. The dark blue bar on the left of each category is from home without parents' permission. That kind of stands out for tobacco, marijuana, prescriptions, also for alcohol, but a little higher than home without parents' permission for alcohol is home with parents' permission. So 31% are saying that they're getting it from home and their parents are okay with it. And this is among those who have used. Now, looking at where they're using it most often, this is a little trickier because you gotta look sideways now instead of up and down. So what stands out is vaping, alcohol, and marijuana all are mostly used with friends at my home or my friend's home, followed by at a party. Prescription drugs is the only one that is most used at home alone or also at a party. But that's the other substances less likely to be used at home alone. Now we're looking at use at school, which includes school events. So this includes sporting events, after-school activities, but at school, not necessarily during school hours. These numbers are low. We want to look at the scale here. We're only going up to 6%, right? So they may look big on the chart, but they're quite low. Overall, 4% reporting vaping at school, 1.5% reporting alcohol, 2.6% reporting marijuana, perhaps in a vape, maybe not. Now we're looking at DUI, and this pattern holds in almost every community we work in. More youth report driving under the influence of marijuana than alcohol, past month or lifetime. So overall, about 0.5% of 11th or 12th graders reporting driving under the influence of alcohol, 1.6% reporting driving under the influence of marijuana.
In the past month.
In the past month. So in the full report, there's a long list of risk factors that are related to having ever used substances. We have middle school and high school, just high school and just middle school, and this is an association, it's not causation, but we can see that there's a statistical relationship between having ever used substances and some of these other behaviors of concern. So what stood out to me is youth who have used any substance in their lifetime are more likely to report that sources of anxiety are home and family life. They're more likely to report having thoughts about self-harm and actually self-harm behaviors. And they're also more likely to have felt sad or hopeless 2 or more weeks in a row. And again, it's a little like chicken or the egg. We don't know if one precedes the other, but we know that they're associated.
I call this slide the why should we care about youth substance use? To me, this is why. All these things are associated with youth substance use.
So looking now at less frequently used substances, we keep an eye on these because they're particularly dangerous and also because there may be relevant context. So obviously CBD is not necessarily on this list because it's particularly dangerous, but it's important to keep an eye on because it's in the conversation with THC and cannabis and other products. So overall, 8.5% are reporting having ever used a CBD product. Looking at the illicit substances that we're a little bit more concerned about, inhalants stands out, 2.8% reporting ever having used one of those in their lifetime. The other one that stands out to me here is synthetic marijuana, 1.9% reporting ever using synthetic marijuana in their lifetime. Sometimes in other communities we see other things like maybe meth top-ups. That doesn't stand out here. And the other thing I want to note is we're always keeping an eye on heroin and fentanyl, especially in Connecticut where we have an epidemic. 0.4% of students report ever using heroin or fentanyl, and that number is less than 6. We suppress it because it's less than 6. So while it's particularly a concern in the state, we're not really seeing it in the middle school or high school. Finally, we'll look at toxic stress before I turn it back over to Bonnie.
Alyssa, I'm going to pause for a minute.
Sure.
I think there's a question about what synthetic marijuana is. I heard a whisper of that.
Well, I have examples of synthetic marijuana, which are like Spice, K2, and Delta-8. These are things that are not, they're not marketed in the same way as like THC, and some shops can get away with like selling Delta-8. I'm not actually an expert on synthetic marijuana.
I'm not an expert myself, and I think you explained a fairly good piece of it, but it is a substance that at one time was legal to be sold anywhere in Connecticut, and is now, and actually our law enforcement folks are shaking their heads, they probably know better than we do. It's illegal now, but people still sell it in convenience stores, is my understanding.
Yeah, sometimes.
Sometimes.
What is it, chemically based, or they use plant material with chemicals in it, or?
Well, my understanding is all chemical based.
All chemical, okay. So how do they use like a powder and smoke it in a pipe?
Yeah, it's similar consistency to ground up marijuana,
Okay.
so.
Usually sold in little packets. We saw more in inner cities.
Yeah.
We all worked out of the Talon Barracks. We saw more like in the Hartford area. Not that we didn't get them out here, we actually had a pretty good dealer in Tolland that we did a search warrant on. Had tons of it back when they made it illegal, but they still wanted to sell it in their store in Hartford because they had already paid for it, and that was their business. Very little we see of that.
Delta-8 is sometimes in like a liquid or oil that you can vape as well, I believe.
My understanding is that there can be pretty serious medical repercussions upon first use.
It's all correct. The majority of it is unregulated, almost like vaping. Like there's thousands of chemicals in vapes, and in actuality, like real scientists or whoever figures out what's in there, they only know a very, very small percentage of what's in the vape. It's the same with synthetic marijuana. It's just stuff. They don't even know what's in there, but they're putting it in their bodies.
So they could have an allergic reaction to something too and do it.
Some people do, yeah. So they look at it as a synthetic marijuana, and they see the word marijuana, so they think it's going to give them the same buzz or high as marijuana, which generally speaking is more of a lull, just kind of drifting around. Whereas, especially K2 and Spice that I know, that I've dealt with, it can ramp up your body's functions, so your heart starts racing, your breathing is increased, everything it almost feels like you're having a severe panic attack, and it's the opposite effect of what people will expect, so then they go into it, an anxiety attack on top of it all, so sometimes they end up in a hospital because their heart's pounding out of their chest, almost literally.
And that could kill them too.
Correct.
Like cardiac arrest. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thanks for asking, or picked up on an ask.
So the last section of data we're going to look at before we move on to our next section is toxic stress indicators. And we started doing this maybe a year ago in communities in a response to a request to put on ACEs questions, which are adverse childhood experiences. We ultimately decided that we don't feel at the time now that ACEs are appropriate to be asked in that setting, particularly because students will then reveal things that we can't help them with. And so we got at it kind of at a different way to still look at behaviors or experiences that are concerning, and so we're calling this the toxic stress module. So what this looks at is, first on the left is, have you ever seen, heard, or been a victim of violence in your community, neighborhood, or school? and 10.4% of students reported ever experiencing community violence. Next is discrimination, 17.5% reporting experiencing discrimination ever. Actually, these are in the past year, I should say. And discrimination, just so you know, is we ask them if they were ever made to feel inferior or excluded because of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, learning differences, or disability. Looking at housing, have you had problems with housing? 3.2% reporting that in the past year. And then 4.8% reporting, have you ever worried that your family did not have enough food? So food insecurity is what we're looking at there. And those are, the housing and the food are fairly low compared to the other communities we work in.
Agreed. Okay, so we just shared a lot of data with you. For a minute, maybe we can unpack that. So, was there anything that surprised you or that you have more questions about?
My partner and I thought the vaping stats were low.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, we have to remind ourselves that we deal with it more often, so maybe it's higher in our mind than in actuality.
Sure.
It'd be nice to think about too.
Yeah, it's your day-to-day, so there are probably a large number of students, I think the data support that, but they might be, a little bit on the lower side that are not vaping, but when you're, even youth, when your peers, when you see a couple of your peers vaping, it feels like all your peers are vaping.
Yes.
We know that it impacts the perception around norms. So vaping maybe felt a little low. Anything else?
One thing I was wondering, do these kids get anything from their older brothers and sisters who are in the, 18 to 21 or, old enough to buy, stuff? And are they getting it from not just their parents, but are they getting that when I was growing up as a kid, that's where we got most of our stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, I had some friends that their older brothers and cousins and sisters, that's where we got most of the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or they stole it right out of their parents' house and their parents were clueless.
Sure. So we don't know specifically about brothers and sisters from this. We can, friends, peers kind of can wrap that into it. One thing that does often address that question is when we talk to youth. So I know we have at least one youth representative. So we don't want to put her on the spot to say, what do you know about all your peers, unless you feel comfortable doing so. But certainly talking to youth and getting more of that anecdotal information specific to Summers can help understand more about the source and more about attitude.
Where is the source,
Yeah.
I mean, that's, to me, is the biggest issue. Where are they getting it?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I'm very old, so I don't think that they're doing it the same way, but it was always easy in a small town, to get this stuff from people.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And, to be honest with you, the cops, they were clueless in our town. They were absolutely a bunch of clueless idiots. And we got away with so much. We got away with murder. In our town, kids were doing all sorts of really nasty stuff because the cops in our town were stupid. And we didn't have very many police either. So it was just, it's one of those things where we do whatever we wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, I think, asking youth sort of anecdotally but confidentially what they see in their peers, not their own personal experience perhaps, is one way to learn more about that. And certainly our law enforcement folks here, certainly having an SRO in the room, might have some thoughts about, two SROs in the room might have some thoughts about that.
I'm not surprised at the numbers for friends and peers. That's where they're getting it from.
Mm-hmm.
It's, friends and peers, age range, to answer Bob's question more specifically, could run the gamut from college to middle school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any specific way to know about your specific question about older siblings a couple of years older. I mean, I think that's probably general and broad.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but as you said, I apologize, your first name again,
I'm Bonnie.
Bonnie, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
As you said, we've probably grouped them in with friends and peers, and maybe just assume that's part of it, right?
Sure. I think so.
Sure.
It's a great observation because I think that is one thing that has held true over the years, that oftentimes siblings are part of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
I just have a comment. What's the, thought around how many kids have fake IDs? I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure. As we're talking about this, I'm thinking, if they're getting it from older siblings, what's the likelihood that, I think they're pretty easy to get. I think fake IDs are pretty easy to get, and I wonder what's the compliance as far as liquor stores in the area selling or locally, not terribly far away, are kids able to do that? And any idea how many, what the percentages of kids that have fake IDs? That might be an anecdotal question also.
Compliance checks we've done with the police department in the past 2 years, went from, it had taken into effect COVID, dealing with Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services out of Hartford, 25%, and now the last BEEP compliance check we did with 10 businesses in town was 100%. So it's definitely improved.
Yeah.
We have another one pending. We haven't yet done the alcohol ones because you have to prove minor.
Yes.
Different from the other ones, so
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to
With
find.
regards to the fake IDs, they're very easy to get online, I know. I have heard scuttlebutt. I've seen a couple of fake ones. Luckily not in our school system, I'm saying in general, on different traffic stops. But I'm not sure of a percentage specific to Summers.
I would think in town that's probably a low number or low percentage, because there's other easier means of obtaining what they want to obtain that they shouldn't be.
I think you see
Not to say
numbers higher for college age level.
Yeah, to physically get into like a real bar in college and stuff like that, but for the purposes of obtaining all the illegal stuff, I would maybe just guesstimate that it's on the lower end here, specifically in town.
Great. Anybody else have any questions or observations, surprises?
I'll make an observation.
Sure.
Comment. So the one thing that sticks out in my head the most, and I've been looking at this data a lot recently, is the home with parents' permission for alcohol use. So that is something that I heavily want to focus on, and also since alcohol is our most used substance amongst youth, and I don't want to say this the wrong way, we always have to, we focus on vaping so heavily for one period of time. We kind of forget about the other substances, or we focus so heavily on marijuana that the other ones are forgotten, and then it kind of increases. And I feel like we've kind of forgot about alcohol a little bit, and that definitely scares me, especially with kids learning to drive, and just, I wonder what that is like, what kind of permission they're getting, whether they're obtaining it and their parents are like, okay, it's all right, or if they're, here's a beer, have a drink.
So. Those are great questions. And maybe, again, we're going to look to law enforcement a lot. It's not often that we have so many representatives in one of these groups. Are there experiences that you're familiar with where there's a couple situations where parents were providing or just looking the other way? Is there...
I don't have any experience with that or any.
Kind of had a recent one with the fireworks.
Yeah, we had in the summer and a couple of them, and it was more they feel safer, keeping the kids under their roof, not driving away, and if they're going to do it elsewhere, we'd rather have them home.
Yeah, I heard parents say that.
That's what we really, that's the majority that we see. Sounds like a reluctant permission.
We call that sort of the take the keys approach. Okay. Yep, not uncommon, especially, I think in smaller communities where there's a lot of back roads. That's where I tend to hear that approach come up a lot. Okay. Yes.
I just think that by and large, most homes have alcohol available. And it, other things might be locked up or protected in a better way than alcohol. And it's very easy to take a swig of whiskey and then water it down too. And there's adults who do that. So
I totally agree with that. What was
I was going to say, I believe that's also. Lainey is our youngest girl. We have 6 kids in our house, 4 of which are still in the school system here in town. But I also think looking at these numbers and what we're talking about alcohol in the homes with parents, I did 20 years with the state police. I just completed my first year as an SRO back in June, starting year 2 here in town. And I think parents maybe a little bit less, more worried about alcohol than other stuff. A little bit more easy to say, go ahead, you're in our basement, go ahead. Or you got some friends over, I don't know, nothing type of deal, right? So, granted, that happens everywhere, right? It happens everywhere. I'm not just, talking about Summers. Born and raised in Springfield, right? I had friends growing up who did exactly what we're talking about. And, we all know people who have done it, so it happens everywhere. But I just think alcohol seems to be a little less worrisome than maybe some of the other stuff, right? In schools, vaping's a big thing. Do we have alcohol in schools? Occasionally, but it's on a weekly basis. It's vapes, it's vapes, or some other drugs and THC oil, right? You don't really hear about alcohol that much in schools because most kids won't do it.
Right.
Maybe they're a little bit smarter than they are with the vaping or THC oil, but when they go home, maybe they're home a lot less without parents, as one of the graphs showed, right? So.
And there's certainly a culture in it, not Summers specifically, but in our country, in our state, around alcohol and celebrations and relaxation, which, sometimes that's where you go as a youth, is you use alcohol to have a good time with your friends, etc. This is not data related, but I have an observation just with all of the incoming different types of alcohol products, and there have been new products for years, but so many alcoholic products today look so similar to your regular old seltzer that you're going to grab out of your fridge. And
that's on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the same thing with the vape products. Right, what grown adult is gonna go in and ask for cotton candy vape?
Right.
Or charging us.
Like the hard Mountain Dew.
Yeah.
The cans look, it's a alcohol black.
Yes.
And it looks like.
Alcoholic Sunny D now.
Yeah, they have an alcoholic
Yeah.
Sunny D now, and it just looks like Sunny D.
Yeah.
And unless you're looking closely, you don't even see the 5.8% alcohol that's very tiny written on it. Yeah.
I did not know that one.
Called pocket shots. That you see them everywhere. Bushes and
Right.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah, some communities will do sort of like a walkthrough assessment of their streets and collect, what do they call that? I forgot what they call that.
Rubbish pickup.
Well, yeah, in the prevention world they call it something. But anyway, an environmental scan.
Yeah, that's what I was.
3 years ago, there was it's a rural place in town, where, around the lake, and I tell you, I got at least, probably, and I'm over exaggerating, 300 nips. And it can't be just the guys, that are doing the fishing.
No, they're probably cleaning up after themselves.
Right. But I just couldn't believe, I'd never seen so many nips, and it wasn't just on the trails, it was also along the side of the roads and stuff like that. It absolutely stunned me with how many kids were doing the nips.
Yeah. Yes.
Just two observations from looking at this. One, on a positive note, I will say, I don't know what we're doing as a community in regards to prescription drugs, but it seems to be working, so keep up whatever you're doing. As someone who is not from New England, you should probably tell by the accent, and has served in multiple communities, that's remarkably low. I've seen in Texas and in Iowa and in Alabama, where I've served, that the rate of prescription drug abuse amongst students is a good deal higher, so keep up the good work with whatever you're doing. And then the other thing I would say, is also someone who has served in multiple contexts, is I find it fascinating that the odd relationship, and we can't solve that here, the very odd relationship our culture has with alcohol. One of the observations being that, you know, y'all call them NIPS. Where I'm from in the South, we call them, what we call them airport bottles. You buy them at the airports before you go on. So this is fascinating. I had to learn, like, a NIP, what the heck is that? But then also, I've lived and served in communities that have had a variety of different ways of dealing with alcohol. I went to college in a dry county in Kentucky, and I've also been in communities where alcohol is sold in a gas station, you know, and then I've been here in New England where there's very odd relationship with state liquor stores or, you know, community-owned liquor stores. I live in Massachusetts, so there's the weird variations. So I'm not sure what that means, or maybe who's buying it, whatever the variety or venue is, and then giving it to younger peers. But just as a reminder, overall, quality of life issue, we have a very weird relationship with alcohol in this country compared to some of the other substances. Now, maybe down the road, we'll see that perhaps more with marijuana, as that becomes more legalized and more acceptable. I'm old enough to remember, you know, that was very much illegal, and there were a lot of consequences for that. But definitely in alcohol, we have a weird relationship that I don't know how to fix.
I think we're already seeing the effects of the THC and the marijuana falling into that category now that many states have legalized it. Medical marijuana, even in our own state, started out as medical marijuana. So then people, including our youth, started thinking, oh, if it's medical, it's good for you. It's okay. So I wasn't surprised to see that.
The stigma's almost gone.
The stigma's almost gone. I wasn't surprised to see that low stat of the risk of marijuana being so low.
Where'd that go?
But, you know, that one thing that comes to my mind, I'm an herbalist, and, you know, there are other things you can use besides marijuana. And personally, I don't know why anybody would want to smoke anything, any kind of herb at all, putting crap in your lungs. And I've actually had people, what herbs can I smoke to calm down? How about a cup of tea? So, you know, and I looked at one woman, I said, how old are you? She said 53. I said, have you ever smoked in your life? And she said, no. I said, why do you want to put crap in your lungs now, at this age? And she looked at me, well, how else can I do it? So, and we're also, I see, and I'm sure there are statistics, anxiety has been through the roof. Parents are anxious, kids are anxious. So, perhaps some of it has to do with, and I know a lot of people who smoke marijuana to go to sleep, for anxiety, whatever. It's education. I think that marijuana does have its place, or cannabis has its place, used medicinally. I sell some cannabis products like salves and stuff. It has its place, but again, we need to educate people on the pros and the cons, when to use it, when not to use it.
I think that's really great for adults in particular. I think adults could really benefit from that sort of decision-making process, having that information. I think when we think about youth, we got to think about the parents, like you said, too. So I think you make really great points around that. And it's nice. I've never had an herbalist in this setting, so what a great perspective. I think in the interest of time, this group is nicely chatting right now. I'm going to have us move on to the next phase because I don't want you all to be here past noon, we promised. We're going to have you use your phones, most likely. And if you don't have a phone, you just let us know. They can access the internet in a minute to rank the substances for youth. We're calling it a prioritization. So we'd like you to consider the magnitude of the substances we presented, how big is the problem. We'd like you to consider the impact, like how does it impact your schools, your law enforcement's capacities, the healthcare system. I don't know if you have a youth advisor or a JRB?
Yes.
Okay, so JRB would be another one to consider. And then your changeability. How changeable is this issue, given what we know about the data we looked at and what you know about the community? So these are the 3 areas we'd like you to consider when you go online in a moment. Sorry, Alyssa. You're gonna essentially answer questions that will complete this matrix. We're gonna be ranking each of these substances on a scale of 1 to 5 under each category. That's gonna be confusing until you go to the survey. You can access this survey online using a QR code with your mobile device. Please do. If you cannot, or you need a printout of the QR code closer to you, thanks, Alyssa, let us know. If you need to do it on paper, absolutely. We have a couple paper copies. Your phones around. We do have some paper copies as well.
You go to your phone or your...
Anybody needs a paper copy, and then we can enter it for you online. And it'll be tabulated, and we'll see what the group thinks the top priority issues are here in Summers for youth. Remembering we're talking about youth.
So you can explain the different, like, magnitude, impact, changeability?
Go back to that. Yeah, let's go back to that. So, magnitude is like the problem, the size of it, how big is it? So we talked about youth rates, lifetime or past 30-day with youth. We know that alcohol is the #1 used substance for youth in Summers, followed by marijuana, I believe, off the top of my head is where we landed. Okay. Impact is, like, how does youth use of marijuana impact the community compared to how youth use of alcohol impacts the community? Is it huge, a 5? Is it a 1, like, not so much? And then changeability is like, can we change it? I mean, I like to think that we can change everything. But realistically, given the culture, community norms, and resources, is it very changeable, a 5? Like, we can do this, Taylor's here, we got these grant resources? Or is it like, oh, I don't know, it's pretty embedded in our culture and it's going to be really too hard?
Maybe we're not ready, right? That's what I think about capacity and readiness. Like, are we ready to have these conversations?
Right. And Casey, the handout that you have, if you need to, like, look closely. Okay, you see. If anyone needs this in front of them, too, those are 3 kind of, like, larger concepts to present. I have 1 in so far. Okay. Alyssa's monitoring your online entries. We can't see who
One person
says
is
what, by the
speaking.
way.
I don't know who you are.
Well, you don't have any, it's
It's anonymous. Yes, yeah.
We have 3 in there.
We saw your answers, Bob.
All right, well,
They're on the camera.
all right, well, it went like it did it again, so,
Okay.
yeah, so I just, I was doing it twice, so I didn't stop.
Okay. Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
Do it?
Oh, yeah, if you don't mind, yeah.
One thing that alarms me the most in this town is the time alone that these kids have. And the other thing is how much time this across the country they spend online.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many freaks online, and just a bunch of evil people out there going after everybody, 24 hours a day. And that's what concerns me is that time, and that's why I was speaking to the Dr. Galloway, the superintendent of schools, and the new principal there. We need to do something with these kids in the afternoon, and we don't have late buses in this town. And I don't understand it. I taught in South Windsor for 35 years, and we always had late buses, and that was how I was able to give a lot of kids a lot of extra help. And, I was there with kids to, at least 4 o'clock on, regular basis, especially the kids that had a lot of trouble, and also gave the kids a chance to participate in after-school activities, and their parents weren't around.
Mm-hmm.
And so, these are the things that concern me the most, is that these kids are going home.
I wonder what percentage of youth are part of a sport at the high
Yeah,
school
I'd
level.
like to know that. I'd really like to know that, yeah.
We have that.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
I don't know if we asked.
We don't have high school specifically on this slide, but we do know that a lot of people are very engaged in team sports. Looks like 35%, 4 or more hours per week on team sports, and that's 7 through 12, so maybe less so in the middle school, probably higher at the high school. We
Yeah.
could look at that, though.
I'm looking at the none side, so that's just physical activity.
Right.
There's other activities here too, like working in a job, volunteering.
Sure.
Well, to me, maybe I was in a different town, but we had a lot of things we had a lot of plays, and music. And, we had a tremendous number of kids that were playing, and we were lucky, Savage Brothers, have that. Tom Savage, before he died of cancer, he was really good about getting the kids there. And so he literally could have, 100 kids, in the afternoon there at school doing stuff. And I thought that was always good because we had a tremendous number of people, kids staying after school, for a lot of things, not just sports.
Yep.
And that's what I thought was good. And it was, as you said, whether it was a play or whatever activities we had for the kids doing, I mean, that's what I think I really like to see kids staying at school more.
I think that's a universal concern in communities is too much unoccupied time.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that I see the most is the kids that are, if it's there, and are still not doing that and are alone.
Right.
So there's a couple of factors that go into that. Does it exist? Are there kids that are getting missed because of various reasons? They're uncomfortable, they're uninterested, a lot of things come into play. They can't afford the small fee, the late bus. So I think that's always good to ask kids about that. What do they think about these things?
There was this one kid, they asked why you've been late 85 out of the 90-some-odd days of school. Well, that's because I get up at 1 o'clock in the morning every day, and I'm online from 1 to 4 in the morning. And that's why she was late to school all the time, because she was up at her grandmother. She wasn't living with her parents, it was her grandmother. And I'm just very concerned at the amount of time that people spend online. And if I see the parents addicted to it, and if these parents aren't around, and the kids are watching their parents sitting on their computers for hours and hours and hours, where's the role model right there? That's what you're doing. And somebody's coming at you constantly. The number of prank phone calls and other things I get every day, it's off the charts.
Wow.
One of the things that we've been looking at for the kids who are not engaged in something because they don't think sports is not for me, arts is not for me, music is not for me, I'm different, there's nothing available. And so that's one of the things we're looking at is how to engage those kids. So we talked at one point about the esports pilot with the library that we're going to do in September, really to try to engage diverse kids who are not necessarily into some of those other activities, get them going. The library is right across from the schools. So this town has a really unique and pretty effective setup for where the school library is located. Just yesterday we're going to be doing some changes inside the Human Services Rec and Leisure building. So we're trading some offices, and we're going to end up with 2 spaces that previously had these huge disused conference tables, and one of them is probably going to be like a counseling space. The other one we're thinking of is like a teen drop-in something. So we haven't quite unpacked it yet, but trying to come up with ways to get kids involved in doing things instead of just sitting at home. One of the things that we heard from, so Brian's wife works in, I think, Hartford School District, and she leads their esports program there, and talked with her several months ago. And one of the things that's interesting is, so even though you have a youth who's at home by themselves gaming, they're actually engaging with other people through the game. And so they're not in a room with 6 other people, but they are communicating, building friendships. And so there is that piece that we know is there, but there's also this other option to bring them together physically. So, hey, I've been gaming with you for 12 weeks, and now I just met you at the library. So there are some, probably going to be some opportunities that we can.
Well, I would hope so, because I really would like to see some of these kids do more than just be sitting at home. And to me, there's a lot of to start abusing, substances.
Can I make a brief comment too, that I think it's also important to recognize the other data that shows that youth are very overwhelmed with their schedule, and what I'm finding from talking to a lot of youth is they have a lot on their plates. They're doing a lot of different activities. They're volunteering, they're trying to get their community service hours, they're getting jobs, driver's licenses, they have 3 sports that they're doing, and then worrying about college. So I think that a lot of them are spending maybe even too much time, like with extracurricular activities and not taking enough time for themselves and focusing on their own health and mental well-being, which also contribute to the use of substances. So I think we have to think about that part too.
Like I said, I was going to say that, that one slide that you were looking at and we were focusing on the negative.
Yeah.
It didn't, that slide didn't say anything about sporting activities, band activities, drama club, right? And these guys, we see them all the time. They're involved in so much other stuff.
Yeah.
And then in the summertime, they have their summer jobs, right? So if we did this survey in July instead of January, would that number of work hours be higher than what we saw in January, right? Because kids are thinking in the moment, oh, right now I don't have a job,
Yeah.
right? But I know several kids get summer jobs and they work all summer long really, really hard so that during the school year, when the sports are active, they don't have to work because they want to do their sports, right? So there's a lot of positive things going on to a point where some of the kids, not all of them, but some of them, they don't have time to themselves to just sit in a corner and lick their wounds.
Yeah.
Because it's constant go, 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 go. And when they're not go, go, go physically, it's go, 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 go. Yeah.
There's a lot of stress on, I see on especially high school kids to get their schoolwork done. And that's, that can be a factor in terms of raising anxiety. Some of the young people I meet are just, they want to get good grades, they're working hard, and they're all half the night doing schoolwork.
Great. Well, great commentary. As a mom, are you sure you want to join that? Maybe you don't need to do that. It's too much sometimes. So Alyssa has kindly tabulated the results from the paper and your online survey responses. Thank you for those for everybody who did it. So it looks like number one substance of concern for youth today is alcohol. Does everyone feel comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Not surprising. Number two, very close together really, marijuana. And then tobacco or electronic nicotine delivery system. So a method for vaping. And marijuana and that come together so closely. We have to treat it separately because of our grant requirements, but we know there's crossover, so they're very close. Is everyone agreeing with where all of these fell? Mostly? Okay. So what we're going to talk about next very quickly is these are what we call the top risk factors or causal factors or drivers based on research that can influence youth to use or not various substances. So we talked about access. We talked about alcohol being available in the home or looking like other substances. Marijuana, with the change in legalization, there might be more access in the home because parents or other family members or friends have access to it. That's one risk factor. Law enforcement is another. Are the laws enforced around retail establishments? Are they enforced about possession? Peer norms that encourage or accept alcohol, tobacco, or other drug use is certainly another. So is it perceived that all your peers are using, so it feels like you should use too? Does it seem like all the kids that you want to be like are using, so maybe you're going to use too? So that's what we call in our data set, when we looked at that peer disapproval or approval, that's aligned. Family norms. So is it normative in your family that everybody drinks as an adult or as a youth on Friday night? Is a lot of your family life surrounded by alcohol, whether it's problematic, social, or both? And then low perceived risk of harm. We talked about that a lot today around marijuana. So do you think it's harmful to you or your friends physically or in other ways to use that substance regularly? And we want that to be high. And we saw today marijuana, the perception's fairly low. So these are the 5 that we look typically most closely at for communities like Summers. There are others that I want to mention because perhaps you feel like they're really important here in Summers, and I don't know that. They're noted at the bottom of the slide. But retail availability, that's tied very closely with enforcement, but that's more around, are there an abundance of outlets where you can purchase that substance? So, Alyssa noted liquor permit density. Low commitment to school. That ties in a little bit with what Bob is saying, around the kids that maybe are not super engaged, or have other things going on in their home that are making it difficult for them to be fully engaged at school. Promotion of use. So that's about, are there community events that really highlight alcohol as a feature that youth are involved in? Or, do you have any other thoughts on that one?
No, I think that's right. I think about what you see, like, in the environment, like community norms kind of about that.
Mm-hmm. We talked about like the bottles on the side of the road. That's an example of where it's not promotion, but it's evidence of use, certainly. So what we'd like to do now is just quickly have a conversation using these squares around alcohol. So based on what you saw in the data and what we just looked at in terms of, bless you, these various risk factors, we want to kind of move these risk factors to where you think they are in terms of, are they changeable? Are they important? And they would belong in the green square. Are they low changeability but still high importance? So perhaps readiness is a factor, as Alyssa mentioned, and they would go in the top yellow square. Is it low importance but high changeability? We'd put it at the bottom, and then in the red, like, we're not going to go there right now because it's low importance and low changeability. So we'll just work through each for alcohol real quick. So the first one is peer approval or disapproval. Where do we think that falls in terms of the importance here in Summers and the changeability? So youth feeling like most of their peers use, or that it's acceptable for their peers to use alcohol.
I think it's high.
High in the green?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's where it mostly comes from. I know when I was in high school, that was, believe it or not, I used to drink.
Sure. Some things go on through history. I agree. Does anyone feel differently about that one? If we end up with everything in high, we're going to have to feel differently. But how about ease of access? We talked a bit about that today in terms of alcohol. Where do we think that falls?
Ease of access, changeability is low.
Okay.
But,
I don't think you're not gonna change where kids are getting it from.
Yes, let's keep it real. Got it. How about parental approval or disapproval around youth alcohol use?
Or like family norms in general, like parental modeling, perception of like rules, clear family rules.
It's also in the high-low square, in my opinion.
Okay. Perception of risk or harm around alcohol. Changing youth's perception of risk or harm.
I think it's going to be hard to change their mind because they don't think anything's going to hurt them. We've had so many car accidents in town related to alcohol and deaths that young people over the last 50 years, well, it's been more than that now. It's scary.
Yeah, okay. So this is a very realistic group.
Yeah.
Okay. So knowing that, I think it's important that we try to select out of these two. Taylor, you like two for your purposes?
Yeah.
So it seems like we feel comfortable with peer approval or disapproval in that green box of high changeability, high importance. Is there one in that low changeability but high importance that we feel like we might be able to move to the green box and feel comfortable with it?
ease of access.
Ease of access. And remember, we have Taylor here as a resource, who both has knowledge about evidence-based approaches to change community norms. That's a lot of buzzwords.
Risk and harm.
Using perception of risk and harm.
I agree with Brian.
If you can make it seem like it's, more harmful to you, they might be more willing to change their habits.
I think if you were to give any high school kid a test with 10 questions about what's right and wrong, or is a harm rule or not, I think 100% of the kids would know how to answer the questions properly and score 100%. But then when they go home, it's different.
So what I have in my head right now is knowledge is not behavior.
Right.
So we all as adults make decisions every day that are not the best for our health, myself included. But I'm fully informed about that decision, and I agree with you. When it comes to perception of risk harm, this is where I'm not as impartial. If we feel like there's a gap in knowledge, let's move it, like you're saying. If we think there's an approach we can take around access or parents, let's consider that too, because we talked a lot about how the parents have such influence. Parents are anxious, the kids are anxious. The parents have drinking behaviors, the youth do. We talked about access in terms of peers as the #1 source for alcohol too. So not that I'm against perception of risk harm, I just want to be careful because sometimes you get a ceiling with that.
For alcohol in particular. I think when we talk about marijuana, we might be more interested in education, because I don't know that the risk harm is coming through clearly with the legalization.
What do you mean by a ceiling?
Ceiling effect, in a sense. Sorry, I should have completed that statement. So, like, you can have all the information you want as Gerard.
Oh, sorry.
Was saying, but doesn't mean their behavior is going to change, because the norms are such. Everybody's doing it, even though it's not the best for you. There's certainly risks. And Taylor, do you have any thoughts you want to chime in on?
I just wanted to listen to everybody, because I wanted to,
You don't want to influence it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I would say parent approval and approval. I think that once you reach the parent, there could be accountability there. Because no one wants their child to be harmed, right? Like, that's, you hope that's the thought process to it. It's just the problem is getting to access the parents. They're so busy, they have things going on. They can't always attend meetings like this. So that's...
Should attend, don't.
Sure.
And I think today, social media is a double-edged sword. There's so many ways to reach parents with social media and other messaging within the community too. They don't have to come sit necessarily.
What are the talking points? So some of those conversations are really difficult for people if you've not been a parent before, if you've not had teenagers. So how do I talk to my child about that? What are the words I can use? How do I approach it? That part of education can be helpful too.
And sometimes we show parents how many kids aren't sure that they have clear family rules around alcohol, and sometimes parents are surprised by that. They think that they're giving clear family rules, and maybe they're not. And I had another thought about parents, but I don't know what it was.
Is there a way to maybe do, because I don't think this is one of the flags, but the parental perception of risk harm for these substances? Because if we're looking at it, how do the parents perceive alcohol?
That's a great segue. Parent and community survey.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that we'll be able to do later this year, is survey the parents and other adults in the community about their perceptions, which will certainly impact this ongoing assessment of how to approach this work. So it is technically a gap today, as we don't have a great sense of parents' perceptions. We just have youth's perceptions of what their parents think.
My thought was social host law. Sometimes parents need to be reminded about the social host law. That was my thought.
I think it's a lot easier, and I'll speak because I've lived here for 21 years.
Sure.
And I'm not referring to myself in the 6 kids I have in my house. If you ask our youngest daughter here, it's a lot easier to be friends with your kids than it is a parent to your kid, which is the opposite way in my house, and you can ask her as she shakes her head. I think parents in this town are a little bit lax when it comes to parenting. That's all of the above, everything we've talked about the last hour and a half here, and then some. I think parents need to be more involved in their kids' lives, including everything down to sports, but along with everything on these charts that we've seen here, I think that's where we're really lacking. And I don't mean just Summers, by the way, I mean in society, right? Maybe it's being a police officer for 21 years, in corrections for 5 years, a parent of 6, right? We all walk very similar lines. If everyone's a parent here, I'm not sure who's who, but.
That's why I think that, like, the parental approval, disapproval
Right.
is hard to change.
Yeah.
Because I hate to use the, cliche terminology, but our age group that are raising kids now, we're softer on our kids than our parents were on us.
Yes.
And so, it's hard to change, like, oh, no, it's okay, we don't, I watched a kid for 40 minutes scream at Cloder Farms because he didn't get the right type of ice cream. His mother wanted 3 different ice creams. Cloder Farms ain't cheap. Wanted 3 different ice creams to try and make him happy. That would have never happened in my house. You didn't like the first one? Oh, well, sorry.
No ice cream.
There, again, like I said, I've lived in town 21 years, and I think maybe if we can get into more of the parental or the parents or guardian surveys, which, as you said, might be coming in the next year, which would be good, but I think we're a little lax, and I'm saying that as a parent, not just as a police officer or one of the school resource officers,
So I think, I'm going to give you just quick a couple examples of strategies that could be implemented that are known to make changes. And that might help you decide what you might move into that green box. And Taylor, feel free to jump in because you're immersed in your logic models. So ease of access, you would certainly consider possibly messaging about locking it up essentially, or knowing what's in your fridge. That's just basic messaging to all adults in the community, but specifically targeting parents. We know that retail availability is not a top thing for youth, but we know peers is. So maybe some messaging that kind of infuses that peers are one source of alcohol and that parents should be aware of that, know what's happening in the home, and not judgment. I would never, in where I sit, encourage any sort of messaging that's paternalistic or judgmental toward a parent. Something that's supportive, something that says, hey, we're in this together, just so you know, this is something to be aware of. Look out.
Kind of like, did you know? Did you know?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I don't think Taylor or Matthew are looking to come at and make enemies of parents or have any sort of tension. So that's ease of access, and then jumping the parental approval or disapproval, this would obviously be more targeted toward parents and be more just about talk about it. Did you know that this many kids are not quite sure about the rules related to alcohol in the home? Make sure you talk to your kids about it, what's expected in the home. Talk about the risks, too. All of these risk factors are tied together. There's a relationship. So with that being said, and having only a couple minutes, and I don't want to keep you, are there any thoughts about what you might want to move to the green for alcohol?
I think the perception of risk and harm, like I said a few minutes ago, I think everyone knows there's an extreme risk. We're talking about youth now, right?
Yeah.
That's why we're here, obviously, but I think they know that there's a risk involved and it is harmful. I think that's high. I think that they know that.
Right. So you think it's high, like it doesn't need to be addressed, or you think it should move because it's...
I think they know. I think that they know there's a high risk and there's a high harm ratio.
So maybe not that changeable because it's already where we want it to be.
Yeah.
Probably the parental approval, disapproval is what we need to change, work on.
I think it's doable. I'm not saying it's easy, but I do think it's doable.
But perhaps ease of access those are very closely related.
They are.
My mother's gonna kill me, stop me from doing a lot of stuff. Growing up. And maybe that goes to what you're saying, everybody's friends with their kids, buying them 3 ice creams. My mother would have loaded us in the cars and nobody's getting ice cream. That was the end of that. So, but maybe it's really educating parents, giving them, helping them put some tools in their toolbox, how to deal with situations. You know, you're embarrassed that your kids haven't, you know, I've seen 14-year-olds have a tantrum in public. If I ever did that, I don't think I would have saw the light of day for a year. So, you know, maybe parents need more support.
That's a great point. Scott?
Yeah, I would second the push towards sort of support or education for parents.
Sure.
Because, I mean, as wonderful as it is for us to gather and compare our experiences being raised, and how hardcore our parents were in comparison, by golly, you know, kids this day, you know, that, I'm sure we all have really delightful stories about that. I mean, I was raised in the South. We all ain't see nothing.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
You know, you guys have no manners in comparison, but, those are wonderful stories, and we can roll eyes at different parenting styles, but I will tell you that, you know, from my line of work in the ministry, that gets you nothing. Great, we all walked away here, we all felt self-superior, let's go pat ourselves on the back and go home. I would be much more interested in, forgive me if Taylor or your group has specific educational suggestions or programs in place that can get us to that result, rather than kind of sit here and chat about different styles. I would wholeheartedly encourage in that. And what also seems, what I'm hearing, I could be wrong, is the ease of access issue. I'm glad that folks kind of put some nuance on it, because what I think ease of access, I think the ability to buy from a store.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And so what I want to make sure I'm on the same page. When I'm hearing ease of access concerns, it's more not so much whether one can get it from the liquor stores in town as a middle or high schooler. It's more ease of access from parents, ease of access from old. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would also sort of lift up, if we're going to run with that, if your group or anybody else has some way to address that, because in a way it would seem to be easier if it was, hey, maybe this is my experience. We all know that the liquor store in the town next door, they have our ID. We can go, you know, hit them that way. That would be an easier response. That the ease of access seems to have much more of a nuance and much more of peers and family, which is a little bit harder. Not that we shouldn't continue to crack down on folks not checking IDs, accepting fake IDs, any of that stuff, but that's a little bit more direct.
They've actually toughened up. I have to give an ID. I buy cigarettes.
Oh, I love it when they ask me for ID in Massachusetts. I'm like, please, check it out. I appreciate you for doing that. Bless your heart.
I do think where we've landed then, because we're having such a focus on parents, and it looks like we're talking about parental approval or disapproval, but with this undertone of support and strategies for parents universally related to parenting and communication with their teens, making sure we're hitting upon alcohol and perhaps marijuana, and also making sure that something around access is infused with that messaging. Mm-hmm. That's a big ask for a communications campaign, but I think that we can work together behind the scenes and kind of tailor it with Taylor.
I mean, if it makes anybody feel better, I am rolling out Operation Parent Books to the whole entire middle school. Me and Margot just confirmed that today. So in October, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, they will all get the Operation Parent Handbooks, which are strictly for their parents to learn about how to talk about social media, different substances, bullying, XYZ, because you don't want to shame the parents at all. And you have to be okay with the fact that they don't know something. And I'm still learning as well, so it's just baby steps to get there. But I think definitely working with the parents to give them the right resources and education to help be a part of this decreasing the substance use in summers. So
does the peer approval, disapproval, parental approval, disapproval feel okay based on what we talked about in the green? Okay. Great. So we were hoping to do 2 of these. We were hoping to address marijuana, and I know that we are over time. Does everyone feel like we could work through it, and looking at Matthew, in like 3 to 4 minutes based on, we know the flow? Do you think we could squeeze it in? If you can't, that's absolutely okay. We got into some more discussion than I anticipated, which is great. So same idea here, marijuana. Youth marijuana use is number 2 substance of concern based on our matrix outcomes. Based on what we've talked about, who wants to shout out what they think the first thing that belongs in the green box might be?
Risk and harm.
Love it.
There's not enough information out there for people, real substantial information.
Great. Okay, how about a second one?
With legalization now, ease of access is gonna become a lot higher.
Okay. Anybody else?
Not going to the stores, but more parents are gonna readily have it at home.
You can grow in your yard.
Yeah.
Yep.
There could be the parental approval, disapproval piece too.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's okay for me, it's not okay for you, and that, kind of that disconnect?
Sure. So similar to alcohol, if we leaned toward parental approval, disapproval, and addressed access as sort of a secondary area, maybe then we could almost mirror the alcohol strategy messaging with the marijuana strategy messaging. Does that feel okay for everyone?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So, risk, harm, parental approval, disapproval, knowing we want to hit that ease of access, and messaging around parenting with these great workbooks that I did catch the name of, but
Operation Parent.
Operation Parent workbooks already, those resources around parenting and communication are happening. So, folks, a little over time, but we got what we came for with a great discussion. Kirsten, who joins our team officially next week, again, was so kind to take more detailed notes. So Alyssa and I said we will take those notes, our own, and work with Taylor behind the scenes to just help refine some of the work she's already begun to essentially put together. Alyssa, will you skip forward to the...
Oh, yeah, sure, sorry.
This is what Taylor's making. It's a logic model. Some people may have seen it. But basically, she's working to outline the top substance of concern, the root causes, we call them risk factors, drivers, and then the local conditions. And we talked a little bit about that today. And it may be that we'd have to come back and ask you all for more detail on that at another time as she works through her logic models. But we had some good starts today, for sure.
I want to make a point really quick. With this logic model, the local conditions are just fill-in. That doesn't mean that those are the actual local conditions for summers. So, like, youth bringing alcohol in water bottles to school, I don't know if that's happening. Or if they're drinking at the 4-town fairs in front of youth. Again, I don't know if that's happening. That's why we can have these conversations, and residents of Summers can tell me where are they drinking the alcohol, how are they obtaining it specifically. And this is due in November. And even if we don't have those filled out, you'll see a lot of X of Y because we don't have the focus groups of the data for it yet. That's okay. I can submit it blank like that, and it will be approved, and we can work on that over time. But I'm not saying those are the local conditions. Those are mostly just examples, and they can be filled in with different thoughts from the commission.
Yes, Scott.
Forgive my ignorance, but I'm 43 and I grew up in the just say no generation. That's probably why I'm ignorant on drugs. But I you know, growing up, you could have the data say alcohol does the following. You could have it tobacco. You could say, look, there's a connection there between cigarettes and lung cancer and other poor health results. I'm curious because I'm assuming that with marijuana being illegal for such a long amount of time, my understanding wasn't like you could just roll up to the FDA and say, why don't you give me a study and I can, you know, have these kids do marijuana and see what it does to them as compared to some of the other more legal substances. So at least the way that my mind works, or it did in high school, was, okay, I have the data that says this produces for this. When we have risk perception conversation with youth or with parents, what firm data would we have, or firm scientific studies would we have to say, this for pot is this, rather than like it messes you up, or sort of more qualitative stuff. What sort of quantitative where you can say, hey, put down that Marlboro, there's a chance you're gonna get lung cancer. Put down the beer, you've got liver cancer, or this is
like a longitudinal approach.
Yeah, that's the way. I mean, I'm just perceiving or trying to remember back in the dim reaches of time. I mean, as a smart aleck high schooler, to be like, well, okay, I got this I understand, but, you know, you're just telling me this is the devil weed. now it's legal.
There's more studies out there about chemicals and how they affect. Also, the way it's bred now is very different than when I was in college. There are factors, and there is scientific evidence of problems with it.
Because that would be my encouragement for whatever route we take, is as clearly just say no, didn't really work for my generation. So what are the, and marijuana seems to be different than some of the harder illegal substances.
It's
crack is bad, coke is bad, so like what do we have?
It's
There's medical documentation, medical studies out there from like a historical perspective, from like self-reported users and comparisons. Like
that would be my encouragement.
Sure.
Clearly, I'm not in the right circle.
Yeah.
I think it's hard too, because this is all, so like vaping, it's a new thing. So even if it's been around for 10 years, that's so new. And the legalization of marijuana too, everyone's kind of figuring out how to handle that. So whereas before, you could put in different ordinances or laws so youth could not have access at all and nobody could have access to it. But now the facts are, parents can legally own it. So it might be more of a harm reduction approach, making sure that they're locking up their marijuana products at home with lockdowns or medication boxes so that they can't just take a gummy, because it's as simple as that. Same thing even with alcohol, you can lock that away, and there's other ways to go about it, but I think that's what we have to have, those conversations, and I would love for you to bring that up more with me. Contact me at any time, because that's what I want to hear, right? So I appreciate that.
Harm reduction seems to be the key. I have a family who do public health in North Carolina.
Yeah. Yep.
One comment is, I like to go to concerts. I go to a lot of concerts. And this past summer, in the past, once in a while, somebody would light up and you could kind of smell it. Somebody in the crowd was having a joint. This past summer, I've gone to some concerts where it's like half the lawn was having a joint. I mean, there was the secondhand smoke. You were like sitting in a cloud.
Yeah.
So I've seen a big change just in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, you can designate certain areas for that. So a lot of different places, they have beer gardens where you can't take the alcohol out of that certain location, because you can't get rid of alcohol or marijuana if it's legal for adults to use, but you can limit how the youth are accessing it or being surrounded by it and the positivity of it, so.
You're proposing the cannabis corral?
That's the thing, it's getting, if it's legal and it's around, would you rather it be around the whole entire concert or in a designated area away from you? So, it's an odd thing to think, it's so new, but those conversations are getting, it seems.
Well, I think there's some great next steps. I mean, even the conversations that have been had now, Taylor knows who's thinking what, as you're saying, Scott. So, I mean, I think this is a really successful and great interactive session. I'm sorry, we're a little over time. We knew we were squeezing it in, but you all had a lot to say, which is great. So we'll work with Taylor to just elevate or modify the logic models based on your input. And, you know, Alyssa and I, and now Kirsten, will be around, because we will be serving as sort of data consultants and evaluation folk for the lifetime of this grant. So we're pleased to be working with you all.
Taylor, you're going to work with the schools, right?
I'm sorry?
You're going to work with the schools,
Yep. I talked to Margot even this morning, and we got things rolling in, and
Yeah, we had a conflict with she's there.
Dr. Myers here on behalf of the school.
She's in the school. Elementary school, sorry. Elementary. I would like to see them.
So the schools are actually, they have, a retreat today, annual retreat, so they couldn't be here. However, Bonnie and her team have offered to do a special session for the schools, so they can review this.
You told me that.
Yep, share the commentary and the discussions.
and it's been recorded.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Bonnie, Alyssa, Kirsten. Thank you, everybody. That's right.
Yeah, frame that, you know. There's some days. Some days where I'm not gonna get it, so usually when the kids are yelling.